My daughter-in-law gave me a cruise with her and my son during a fancy dinner, while she distracted my son on the dance floor. A waitress handed me a note that read, "I just saw her put something in your drink." I switched our glasses and watched as my daughter-in-law drugged herself instead of me. 20 minutes later, she was babbling nonsense while my son stared at her in horror, asking if she needed a doctor. That's when I realized I had been living with a predator for months, and she had been slowly destroying my mind, one sip at a time. If you're seeing this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because this story gets much darker than you think. And I guarantee you've never heard anything quite like it. But let me go back and tell you how I got to that moment, because honestly, I should have seen it from day one. The signs were all there. Blazing red flags that I mistook for welcome mats. When my son, Jesse, called on a Tuesday night, his voice had this excited tone I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special. Are you free for dinner this weekend?" My heart did a little leap. Not for romance. Heaven knows I'd given up on finding love again after Richard's passing, but because it had been so long since Jesse sounded genuinely happy. Success had made him distant. His tech firm consumed his hours, and our weekly dinners had gradually become monthly phone calls, then holiday visits with awkward hugs. Saturday night arrived, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time picking out the right outfit. Nothing too fancy. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but good enough to make a good first impression. The restaurant was one of those upscale places in downtown Newport Beach with white tablecloths and waiters who whispered. When Jesse walked in, hand in hand with this stunning blonde, I immediately understood why he'd been so preoccupied lately. She was the kind of beautiful that makes other women check their lipstick. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mom, this is Kayla," he said, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he got his first bike at age 12. "Mrs. Thompson, I've heard so much about you," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile seemed genuinely warm, and her grip was firm without being aggressive. "Jesse talks about you constantly. He told me all about your charity work and how you practically built half the children's section of the library." "Really? Because he barely called me these days. But sure, let's go with that narrative." Throughout dinner, Kayla hung on my every word as if I were delivering wisdom from Mount Sinai. She complimented my vintage Chanel earrings. "They're absolutely timeless. Where did you find them?" She asked thoughtful questions about Richard's engineering career and even wanted to know about my volunteer work at the animal shelter. When I mentioned how quiet the house had become since Richard passed, how I sometimes went days without a real conversation, she practically gasped in sympathy. "Oh, Phyllis, may I call you Phyllis? You shouldn't be alone so much. That's heartbreaking." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Jesse, didn't you mention that cruise we booked for next month? The one to the Caribbean?" Jesse looked genuinely surprised, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Well, yeah, but I thought we discussed it was just going to be the two of us."
Phyllis schult kam vis US.
Kayla's enthusiasm seemed to bubble over naturally. "It'll be perfect, just the three of us getting to know each other. I would absolutely love to get to know my future mother-in-law better."
Please say yes, Phyllis.
It would mean the world to me. Future mother-in-law. The words hit me right in the chest, in that empty space that had been aching since Richard died. Someone wanted me around. Someone was planning a future that included me. I said yes before Jesse could object. And frankly, I would have said yes to a trip to Antarctica if it meant feeling wanted again. Over the next few weeks, Kayla and I became practically inseparable, and I started to feel like I had a daughter for the first time in my life. Shopping trips where she actually asked for my opinion on dresses. Coffee dates where she listened to me ramble about Richard's terrible jokes and his obsession with fixing things that weren't broken. Long lunches where she encouraged me to order dessert and told me stories about her teaching job that made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. She was everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law, attentive without being clingy, sweet without being saccharine, genuinely interested in my life without seeming like she was interviewing me for something. Or so I thought. God, I was such a fool. During one of our shopping sprees at that fancy mall near Newport Beach, she seemed absolutely fascinated by my house. We had stopped by so I could grab my good credit card, and she walked through the rooms with this dreamy, almost reverent expression. Her fingers trailed over the marble countertops in the kitchen. She stood for a full minute admiring the crystal chandelier Richard had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. And she spent far too long admiring the view from the master bedroom balcony. "Phyllis, this place is like something out of a magazine," she sighed, sinking into Richard's old leather chair in the study as if she were testing how it felt.
I bet you wake up every morning feeling like absolute royalty. The light, the space, the way it all flows together, it's perfect.
"It's just a house, dear," I said, though I was flattered by her appreciation. "Richard and I got lucky, but it's really too big for me on my own now." She shook her head vigorously, her eyes still scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. "No, it's not just a house. This is a forever home. Someone could live here forever and never want to leave, never have to leave." The way she said those last words, "never have to leave," sent a strange shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as enthusiasm. Maybe she was just imagining her future with Jesse, thinking about the kind of home they might build together one day. That same afternoon, I made what I now realize was a crucial mistake. While we were at the department store, I left my handbag with her for a few minutes while I dashed to the restroom. She was trying on a scarf, chatting with the sales clerk about how silk scarves never go out of style, and it seemed natural to ask her to watch my things. When I came back, nothing seemed out of place. My wallet was where I'd left it. My keys were still clipped to the inner pocket, and Kayla was right where I'd left her, now trying on a pair of sunglasses that made her look like a movie star. But looking back now, with everything I know, that was probably where it started, when she had access to my handbag, to my pill organizer, to my entire life condensed into that one leather bag. "Lunch already?" she asked brightly, linking her arm through mine as if we were old friends. I should have been more cautious. I should have paid attention to how, after just one visit, she seemed to know exactly where everything was in my house. I should have questioned how someone on a teacher's salary could afford designer clothes and expensive dinners. But I was so starved for companionship, so desperate to feel needed and wanted again, that I ignored every instinct that urged me to be wary. What I didn't know was that my peaceful retirement was about to become a living nightmare. And the woman I was growing to love like the daughter I never had was already planning to destroy me from the inside out, one carefully measured dose at a time. The confusion started about a week before the cruise, and at first, I told myself it was just stress. Maybe excitement about the trip, or the natural anxiety that comes with getting older and the fact that one's mind might not be as sharp as it used to be. It began with little things I tried to laugh off. I woke up in my guest bathroom one Tuesday morning, standing in my nightgown in front of the mirror, completely disoriented. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember if I was at home or in a hotel room. The marble tiles felt alien under my bare feet. The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger, and my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get a grip, Phyllis," I whispered to myself, clutching the marble countertop until my knuckles turned white. "You're in your own house. This is your bathroom. You've lived here for 30 years. But the confusion lingered like a fog, making everything feel unreal and detached. Later that same day, I ran into my neighbor, Jean, at the supermarket. Jean, who I'd known since the Reagan administration, who had brought me casseroles after Richard's funeral, and who still borrowed my hedge clippers every spring. She was standing right in front of me in the produce aisle, holding a bag of oranges and smiling warmly. "Phyllis, how are you, dear?" I stared at her face, familiar but suddenly nameless, and felt my brain scramble for information that should have been automatic. The silence stretched uncomfortably as she waited for my response, her smile beginning to fade into concern. I'm sorry, I'm having one of those days," I finally managed, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "You know how it is. Are you all right?" Jean's voice had that careful tone people use when they're worried but don't want to show it. "You look a bit pale." "Just tired," I lied. Because what else could I say? That at 68, I was losing my mind? That I couldn't remember the name of a person I'd known for decades? When I told Jesse about these episodes on our next phone call, I tried to keep my voice light and casual, as if they were amusing little quirks instead of terrifying glimpses into what felt like early-onset dementia. It's probably just stress, Mom, he said, but his voice sounded distant, distracted by whatever was on his computer screen.
Or maybe you need a vacation.
Good thing you're coming with us on the cruise.
Sea air. Relaxation.
No responsibilities.
It'll be perfect.
Before I could reply, I heard Kayla's voice in the background, and then she was on the phone, her tone warm and reassuring.
Phyllis, sweetie, don't you worry about those little memory lapses.
My uncle went through something similar when he turned 70.
Just age catching up, you know. The sea air will do you absolute wonders.
Sometimes we just need to break from our routines and reset our minds. Her uncle. She mentioned him so casually, as if it were just a normal family story. But something about the way she said it bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. What happened to your uncle? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. There was a slight pause before she answered. Oh, he's much better now. He's in a lovely care facility where he gets all the help he needs. Very peaceful, very serene. He seems quite content there. The incidents began to pile up with increasing frequency. I'd find myself in my kitchen with no memory of walking there, holding a coffee mug and wondering if I had meant to make tea instead. I started telling stories to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, forgetting the endings halfway through. One time, I got lost driving to the bank, a route I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, suddenly as unfamiliar as if I'd been transported to another city. But here's the truly twisted part of the whole situation. Every time something happened, every time I had one of these frightening episodes, Kayla would show up within a few hours. She'd arrive with homemade soup or freshly baked cookies, settling into my kitchen as if she belonged there, brimming with sympathy and concern. You poor thing, she'd say, stirring honey into my tea with such care. These things happen to all of us eventually. The important thing is not to stress about it. Stress just makes everything worse. I thought she was looking out for me, being the devoted future daughter-in-law who genuinely cared about my well-being. It turns out she was just checking on her work, making sure the poison was taking effect exactly as planned. The cruise ship was absolutely magnificent as we boarded in Long Beach. All gleaming glass elevators and polished marble floors, like a floating palace designed to make you forget you were surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. The lobby had a 3-story waterfall and enough fresh flowers to outfit a wedding, and I felt a sense of real excitement for the first time in months. Kayla squealed with delight at everything, bouncing on her toes like a kid at Disneyland. Phyllis, look at this place. It's like something out of a movie. She grabbed my arm, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. We are going to have the most amazing time. I can feel myself relaxing already. But Jesse seemed oddly subdued as we went through the check-in process. While Kayla chatted animatedly with the staff about dinner reservations and show times, he stood slightly apart, scrolling through his phone with a frown that deepened with every message. Everything all right, honey? I asked, touching his arm gently. He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten we were there. Oh yeah. Just work stuff. The merger with Tech Solutions Incorporated is hitting some snags, and my partners are. He shook his head, shoving the phone in his pocket. It's fine. I'm supposed to be on vacation, right? Exactly, Kayla said firmly, appearing at his other side with our room keys. No work, no stress, no thinking about anything except having fun together. She handed me my key card with a beaming smile. Phyllis, you're just down the hall from us, so we'll be practically neighbors. Our first night, we met for dinner in the main dining room, a space so elegant I felt underdressed despite my best cocktail dress. The waiters moved like dancers, the crystal glasses caught the light like tiny prisms, and the menu featured dishes I couldn't even pronounce properly. Jesse made an effort to be present, asking me about my plans for the next day and complimenting Kayla's dress. But there was something strained in his smile, a tension around his eyes that reminded me of how he looked as a teenager when he was hiding a bad report card. You look tired, sweetie, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Are you sure you're okay? Just adjusting to being away from the office, he said, but his laugh sounded forced. It's harder to unplug completely than I thought. After dinner, we strolled along the ship's promenade deck, watching the way the moon painted a silver path across the dark water. Kayla linked her arms through both of ours, chattering about all the activities she wanted to try: the rock climbing wall, the cooking classes, the dance lessons. This is perfect, she sighed contentedly.
Just the three of us. No distractions, no interruptions.
We can really get to know each other. But as we walked back to our cabins, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Jesse kept checking his phone, even though we were in the middle of the ocean with spotty reception. Maybe it was how Kayla seemed almost too enthusiastic, as if she were performing happiness rather than feeling it. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard voices coming from their cabin next door. The walls were thinner than I'd expected, and their conversation carried clearly through the ventilation system. His voice was low but agitated. I never discussed this timeline with you, Kayla. This wasn't part of the plan. Her voice was higher, more insistent. Plans change, Jesse.
We don't have a quasi now.
The opportunity is right here. This is going too far. I'm not comfortable with this. Since when are you uncomfortable with something that benefits both of us? Their voices dropped to a whisper after that, but the tension was unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding, trying to make out more words, but all I could hear were urgent murmurs and what sounded like rustling paper. The next morning, they were all smiles again, acting like the perfect couple planning their perfect future together. Kayla brought me coffee in bed. I thought you might like to start the day slowly, she said sweetly. And Jesse seemed more relaxed, asking about my plans for the day and suggesting we all meet for lunch. But I couldn't forget what I'd heard. I couldn't stop wondering what plan they had been discussing and why Jesse had been so reluctant about some kind of timeline. I didn't know I was about to discover just how wrong my instincts really were and just how much danger I was actually in. By the third day, my episodes of confusion grew noticeably worse, and I began to truly panic about what was happening to my mind. The incidents were no longer just occasional lapses, they were frequent, frightening, and completely unpredictable. I woke up on the ship's deck at 3 a.m., standing by the railing in my pajamas with no memory of leaving my cabin. The ocean stretched out endlessly in all directions, black and mysterious under the starry sky. And for several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember my own name, let alone how I had gotten there. A security guard found me 20 minutes later, still standing there in my nightgown and slippers, shivering in the cool night air. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was gentle but concerned, the tone people use with confused elderly people they worry might do something dangerous. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though nothing about the situation was fine. "Just getting some air." "It's pretty chilly out here for just a nightgown," he said diplomatically. "Can I escort you back to your cabin?" The walk back was humiliating. Other passengers we passed in the hallways stared at me with that mixture of pity and discomfort people show when they witness someone else's dignity unraveling in real time. I held my head high, but inside, I was falling apart. At breakfast the next morning, Kayla was especially attentive, hovering around me like a concerned nurse monitoring a patient. "You look exhausted, Phyllis," she said, her voice laced with sympathy as she settled into the chair across from me. "Did you sleep poorly? Sometimes the motion of the ship can be disorienting." "I'm fine," I repeated, but my hands were trembling as I reached for my coffee cup. "Here, I brought you some fresh orange juice," she said, placing a tall glass in front of me with a bright, encouraging smile, freshly squeezed from the buffet. "And don't forget your morning medications. It's so important to stick to the schedule, especially when our routines are disrupted." She was right, of course. I'd been on the same medications for years: blood pressure pills, calcium supplements, a mild antidepressant my doctor had prescribed after Richard died. But lately, they looked slightly different than I remembered. The shapes were subtly wrong, the colors not quite what I expected. When I mentioned this to the ship's doctor during what Kayla had called a routine wellness check, he was dismissive. "Generic brands often vary in appearance, Mrs. Thompson. Pharmaceutical companies change their manufacturing processes, use different dyes, different coatings. As long as you're getting them from the same pharmacy, there's nothing to worry about." It made sense at the time. Why would I question a medical professional? Kayla also started carrying my handbag during our daily excursions on the ship, supposedly to help out since I'd been a bit scattered lately. So thoughtful of her, So considerate. She took charge of my room key, my credit cards, even my lip balm, organizing everything in this efficient way that made me feel cared for instead of patronized. You just focus on enjoying yourself, she'd say warmly. Let me handle the details. That afternoon, while she and Jessie were at the spa getting couples massages, I decided to rest in my cabin. But as I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of laughter from the pool deck, fragments of their whispered conversation kept replaying in my mind. The timeline they had discussed, the plan that was apparently going to benefit both of them, the way Jessie had seemed so reluctant about whatever Kayla was pushing for. And then there was her comment about her uncle, how casually she'd mentioned his memory problems and how content he seemed in his care facility. Something about that whole story felt rehearsed, like she had told it many times to many different people. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to convince myself I was being paranoid and suspicious because my own mental clarity was fading. But the doubts kept creeping back in, persistent as water finding cracks in a dam. Something was happening to me, something beyond normal aging, and I was beginning to suspect it wasn't entirely natural. But what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. It was gala night on the ship, and the main dining room had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on tables covered in immaculate white linen, and the live orchestra played smooth jazz that made conversations feel more intimate and meaningful. Kayla looked absolutely stunning in a gold sequin dress that clung to her figure like liquid metal, catching the light with every move she made. The dress probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and I found myself wondering again how someone on a teacher's salary could afford such expensive clothes. But then again, maybe Jessie had bought it for her. He had always been generous to the people he cared about. You look beautiful tonight, dear, I told her as we settled at our usual table near the dance floor. Thanks, Phyllis. You look pretty elegant yourself in that navy dress. She reached over and squeezed my hand affectionately. I'm so glad we're all here together. This has been such a perfect trip. Jessie seemed more relaxed than he had been all week, actually laughing at Kayla's stories about her most challenging students and asking me about my plans to redecorate the guest room when we got home. For the first time since we boarded, he seemed present and engaged, rather than distracted by unseen worries. When the live band started playing Moon River, one of Richard's favorite songs, Kayla's eyes lit up. Oh, I love this song. Jessie, dance with me. She stood up, holding out a hand with a playful smile. I'm not much of a dancer, he protested, but he was already pushing his chair back. It'll be fun, she laughed, pulling him onto the polished dance floor where other couples were already swaying to the music. I smiled, watching them move together under the soft lights. Jessie was right, he wasn't much of a dancer, but Kayla made up for his awkwardness with a natural grace, leading him through simple steps that made them look like they were made for each other. Maybe I had been overthinking everything. Maybe they were just stressed from wedding planning and work pressure, and I had misinterpreted normal couple tension as something sinister. That's when the waitress appeared at my table. She was young, maybe 25, with worried brown eyes and the kind of serious expression that immediately put me on high alert. She opened a leather-bound menu in front of me with deliberate precision and said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Here is the special dessert menu you requested, ma'am." I hadn't requested a menu, special or otherwise. Confused, I glanced down at the open page, expecting to see photos of elaborate cakes and chocolate confections. Instead, tucked between the pages, was a folded cocktail napkin with my name scrawled on it in hasty blue ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded the napkin from under the menu's cover. I saw her put something in your drink when she got up to dance. Small white powder from a tiny bottle in her purse. Don't react. Switch the glasses when she comes back. Get help immediately. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I looked up at the waitress, who was still standing by my table with professional composure, but her eyes were intense and worried. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music. She just gave me a slight nod and walked away, leaving me alone with the most terrifying revelation of my life. I looked over at the dance floor, where Kayla was twirling gracefully in Jessie's arms, her sequin dress catching the light like stars, her laughter carrying over the music. She looked so beautiful, so happy, so completely innocent. Then I looked at our table. 2 glasses of red wine sat side by side. Mine, half empty. Hers, barely touched. They looked identical, elegant crystal goblets filled with the same deep burgundy liquid. Without letting myself think about it, without pausing long enough to talk myself out of it, I switched them. When they returned to the table 5 minutes later, both slightly out of breath and smiling, Kayla was beaming. That was wonderful. I haven't danced like that in years. She sank into her chair and immediately reached for her wine glass. My wine glass. She raised it in a toast. To family, and to the most perfect vacation I could imagine. To family, Jesse echoed, raising his own glass. I raised mine with a steady hand, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. To family indeed, I said, and watched as she took a long, satisfied sip of the wine I now knew was meant to destroy me. 20 minutes later, I watched my future daughter-in-law slowly poison herself with her own weapon, and the satisfaction was almost overwhelming. It started subtly. Kayla began blinking more frequently, as if she were having trouble focusing on our conversation. She touched her forehead delicately, remarking casually that the dining room was warm, though the air conditioning was perfectly comfortable.
Are you okay, honey?
Jessie asked, noticing her slightly glazed look. I'm fine, she said, but her words came out just a fraction slower than normal. The wine is stronger than I expected. She had barely had half a glass, but I wasn't about to point that out. 10 minutes later, she began to slur her words. Just slightly at first, then more noticeably. The lights are so sparkly tonight, she giggled, staring up at the crystal chandelier with unfocused eyes. Like little diamonds dancing in the air. Have you ever noticed how diamonds dance, Phyllis? Jesse frowned, setting down his dessert fork. Kayla, are you sure you're okay? You've barely had anything to drink. She tried to stand up and swayed dangerously, catching herself on the back of her chair. And I feel floaty, like I'm on a cloud. Everything is moving, but in a good way. Maybe you should sit down, I suggested, trying to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. The motion of the ship can be disorienting sometimes. She looked at me, her pupils dilated and unfocused, her beautiful face slack with confusion. Phyllis, did you know the ocean has secrets? So many secrets, swimming down there in the dark. Other diners were starting to stare now, whispering behind their hands and pointing discreetly at our table. A young woman in a designer gown acting completely intoxicated at an elegant dinner was exactly the kind of scene that made people uncomfortable. I have secrets too, Kayla continued, her voice growing louder, more theatrical. Big secrets, important secrets. But they're safe with me, because I'm very good at keeping things safe. Jesse was truly worried now, his face flushed with embarrassment and concern.
Okay, that's enough.
Come on, Kayla. Let's get you back to the room so you can lie down. But I don't want to lie down, she protested, her words blurring together. I want to tell Phyllis about the secrets. She should know the secrets, because they're her secrets, too, in a way. My heart stopped for a moment. Even drugged and incoherent, would she confess what she'd been doing to me? You're talking nonsense, Jessie said firmly, standing up and helping her to her feet. Let's go. As he guided her toward the elevator, she kept talking, babbling nonsense about floating castles and golden fish and how lovely it would be to live in a palace by the sea forever and ever. The same kind of confused, disjointed speech I had been experiencing for weeks. The same frightening loss of mental clarity that had made me doubt my own sanity. Only now, I knew it wasn't natural. It wasn't age or stress or early onset dementia. Someone had been systematically drugging me, and I was watching her get a taste of her own medicine. The moment they disappeared into the elevator, I found the waitress who had saved my life. She was clearing tables near the kitchen entrance, going about her duties efficiently, but when she saw me approaching, she set down her tray and gave me her full attention. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion I was struggling to control. I've been watching her for 2 days, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. She's been putting something in your drinks every time you left the table. I work in hospitality. I know the signs when someone's being drugged, the confusion, the disorientation, the way you seemed fine 1 minute and lost the next.
My lex almost gave out from under me.
To have my suspicions confirmed was both vindicating and terrifying. Will you help me prove it? I asked. She nodded without hesitation. The security office has cameras all over this ship. We can check the footage from tonight, and probably from the last few days too. As we walked toward the ship's administrative offices, my mind raced with questions and implications. If Kayla was drugging me, what was her end game? What was she hoping to achieve by making me seem mentally incompetent? And more importantly, was my son involved in this plan to destroy me? The thought made me physically ill, but I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The security footage was like watching a horror movie where I was the victim and didn't even know it. The ship's chief of security, a serious man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, pulled up the recordings from our dining table on a bank of monitors in his office. The cameras had captured everything in crystal-clear detail from multiple angles, with timestamps that would make the evidence undeniable in court. There, the waitress said, pointing at the screen. Right there. We watched as Kayla excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to powder her nose. The camera followed her movements as she stopped at the bar instead of heading to the restrooms. She ordered 2 glasses of wine, the same vintage we'd been drinking all week, and waited as the bartender poured them with professional precision. Then, as the bartender turned away to serve another customer, she glanced around quickly to make sure no one was watching, reached into her small evening bag, and pulled out what looked like a tiny glass vial. Can you zoom in on that? The security chief asked his technician. The image magnified, and we could see her fingers working with practiced efficiency, unscrewing a miniature cap and tapping white powder into one of the wine glasses. She gave it a quick stir with a cocktail straw, disposed of the vial in her handbag, and carried both glasses back to our table with a brilliant smile. The one on the left was hers, the waitress confirmed. She deliberately placed it on her side of the table. My stomach clenched as I saw myself on the screen, completely oblivious, about to accept a glass of poison. I looked so trusting, so grateful for her attentiveness in bringing me a fresh glass of wine. How long has this been going on? The security chief asked, his voice grave with professional concern. I think for months, I said, the words feeling strange and surreal as I spoke them. I've been having episodes. Confusion, memory loss, disorientation. I thought it was age-related, maybe early-onset dementia. But now. We need to document everything, he said firmly. This is attempted poisoning, possibly attempted murder, depending on what substances she's been using. I'm contacting the authorities immediately. As we re-watched the footage, I felt a rage building inside me unlike anything I had ever experienced. This woman, this person I had grown to love like the daughter I never had been systematically destroying my mind for her own twisted purposes. But beneath the anger was something even worse, doubt about Jessie. I have to know if my son is involved, I said, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. The security chief's expression was compassionate but professional. We will investigate everyone who had access to you, ma'am. No exceptions. But right now, we need to secure the suspect and secure the evidence. He made several phone calls in quick succession, to the ship's doctor, to the captain, to what sounded like law enforcement contacts at our next port of call. Within 30 minutes, a plan was in motion. We're going to search their cabin, he explained. If she's been systematically drugging you, there will be evidence. More vials, possibly your medication bottles with swapped-out pills, maybe even documentation of her activities. The thought of Jessie's reaction terrified me almost as much as the discovery itself. How do you tell your son that his fiancée is a would-be murderer? How do you look him in the eye and explain that the woman he loves has been slowly poisoning his mother? But I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed our relationship forever. At 11 o'clock that night, they knocked on Jessie's cabin door. I stood in the hallway behind the security team, watching as my son's face transformed from confusion to horror as they explained why they were there. He was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair tousled from sleep, and he looked so young and vulnerable that my heart ached for him. Mom, he looked at me desperately, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief.
What's going on?
What are they talking about? I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, trying to read his face, trying to discern if the son I had raised was capable of plotting my destruction, or if he was as much a victim as I was. The answer would determine if I had any family left in the world. The search of their cabin was thorough, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Kayla was still groggy from the drug she had accidentally ingested, lying in bed in a silk nightgown and murmuring incoherently while Jessie sat beside her, holding her hand and repeatedly asking what was happening. She was lucid enough to understand that security officers were going through their things but too disoriented to mount any kind of coherent defense. "This is insane," Jessie kept saying, his voice getting higher and more strained with each repetition. "This has to be a mistake. Kayla would never hurt anyone, especially not my mother." But the evidence spoke louder than his protests. Tucked away in her suitcase, hidden in a zippered compartment beneath her neatly folded lingerie, they found 3 small glass vials of clear liquid, each no bigger than a perfume sample. The labels had been removed, but you could see the residue where pharmaceutical stickers had been peeled away. "What are these?" the security chief asked, holding up the vials with latex-gloved hands. Kayla tried to focus on what he was showing her, blinking slowly as if she were having trouble processing visual information. Those aren't. I don't know what those are." "Then why are they hidden in your luggage?" She couldn't answer, or wouldn't. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. They also found a prescription bottle that looked exactly like my blood pressure medication. Same pharmacy label, same drug name, same dosage instructions. But when they opened it, the pills inside were different from what I had been taking for years. "She's been replacing your real medication with these," the security chief explained, showing me the counterfeit pills. "We'll have to get them analyzed by a lab, but my guess is they're designed to cause the cognitive symptoms you've been experiencing." Jessie stared at the evidence in complete shock, his face shifting between disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. "Kayla, what is this? What have you done?" She looked at him with unfocused eyes, her beautiful face slack and vulnerable in a way that would have been heartbreaking if I didn't know what she was capable of. "It's not what it looks like," she slurred, her words coming out thick and imprecise. "Then what is it?" he demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. She couldn't answer, because there was no innocent explanation for having vials of unknown drugs and counterfeit medication hidden in her luggage. But the most devastating piece of evidence was yet to come. They found her tablet computer, and when they accessed the photo gallery, there were dozens of video files I never knew existed. Videos of me during my episodes of confusion, clearly taken without my knowledge or consent. The security chief played them on the small screen as we all watched in horrified silence. There I was, stumbling through my own kitchen, looking lost and disoriented. There I was, forgetting words mid-sentence during a phone call. There I was, appearing drunk and confused during one of our shopping trips I now recognized. "Proof," the security chief said quietly. "She was building a case to prove you were mentally incompetent." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kayla hadn't been drugging me randomly or out of malice. She had been systematically creating a documented pattern of cognitive decline to have me declared legally incompetent, so that she could do what? Take control of my finances? Have me committed to a nursing home? The ship's doctor examined my prescription medications that I had brought from home. Sure enough, my medications had been tampered with. Pills that should have been controlling my blood pressure had been replaced with substances designed to cause confusion, disorientation, and memory loss. "How long has this been going on?" the ship's doctor asked. "Months," I said, my voice hollow with shock. "Maybe since we first met." As they prepared to take Kayla to the ship's holding cell until we reached port, I finally asked Jessie the question that had been tormenting me since this nightmare began. "Did you know?" He looked at me with tears streaming down his face, his expression broken and devastated. "Mom, I swear to you on Dad's grave, I had no idea. I thought, God help me, I thought you were just getting older. I thought the confusion was natural, and I was grateful that Kayla was taking such good care of you." I wanted to believe him. Every maternal instinct wanted to trust that my son was innocent, that he had been manipulated just as cruelly as I had. But trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than love. "The way you were acting," I said carefully, "the arguments I heard, the distance, the stress. "I was worried about you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And Kayla kept suggesting that maybe you needed a professional evaluation. Maybe you weren't safe living alone anymore. I thought she was being caring and responsible, acting in your best interest." The manipulation had been perfect. I realized she had made him an unwitting accomplice, turning his genuine concern for my well-being into a weapon against me. But I still wasn't entirely convinced he was as innocent as he claimed. The next morning, we docked in Long Beach, and real police officers boarded the ship with the kind of efficiency that suggested they had dealt with onboard crimes before. They took Kayla into custody, and she was, by that point, lucid enough to understand that her life as she knew it was over. Detective Abigail Bergman, a sharp woman in her 40s with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude, interviewed me in the ship's conference room while technicians photographed evidence and took statements from witnesses. "We ran MS. Lehman's fingerprints through our database as soon as ship security contacted us," she said, consulting a thick file. "What we found is disturbing." She spread photos out on the table: mugshots, driver's license photos, what looked like surveillance stills from security cameras. Kayla Lehman is not her real name. She is actually Kayla Richter, and she has a criminal record going back 7 years. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. She specializes in targeting wealthy, elderly individuals. I felt sick. There were others. At least 3 that we know of. Most recently, she was married to a man named Robert Klein, age 62, a successful developer from San Diego. He died 8 months ago under what his family felt were suspicious circumstances, an apparent heart attack during a bout of food poisoning. Jessie went pale. She told me she'd never been married. She inherited a significant portion of his estate, about $450,000, plus his house. His children contested the will, claiming their father had been acting strangely in the months before his death, showing signs of cognitive decline that were inconsistent with his medical history. The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. "There's more," Detective Bergman continued. "She had a wealthy uncle, Edward Richter, who was committed to a psychiatric facility 3 years ago after suddenly showing signs of dementia and severe confusion. Kayla was his primary caregiver prior to the committal and now has full power of attorney over his finances." I felt sick. Is he still alive? Very much so. And according to his doctors, his dementia has improved dramatically since he was moved to a different facility and his medications were changed. They are now questioning his original diagnosis. "So she's done this before," I said, though it wasn't really a question. "We believe she's been perfecting this technique for years. She targets wealthy individuals, usually elderly, with adult children who live far away. She gains their trust, slowly poisons them to induce symptoms of cognitive decline, and then either inherits their assets when they die or gains control of their finances when they're declared incompetent." Jesse was trembling, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "If she could do that to you, what was she planning for me?" Detective Bergman gave him a sympathetic look. "Based on her established pattern, I'd say you were next, after your mother had been successfully institutionalized or eliminated. A tragic accident, perhaps. Carbon monoxide poisoning, an allergic reaction to medication, a car crash. Something that would leave her as your widow and the sole heir to your assets and your mother's estate." The scope of her plan was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. She would have destroyed my mind, stolen my life, murdered my son, and walked away with everything we had worked for, likely to start the process all over again with the next wealthy family. "We're reopening the investigation into Robert Klein's death," Detective Bergman said. "And we'll be reviewing the case of Edward Richter as well. By switching those glasses, Mrs. Thompson, you may have saved not only your own life but prevented future murders."
What happens now?
I asked. "Kayla Richter will be charged with attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Given the evidence and her prior record, she's looking at 25 years to life in prison. Your uncle will be moved to an appropriate care facility and his finances investigated. And you will need a full medical workup to determine what substances she's been giving you and what the long-term effects might be." As they led her off the ship in handcuffs, Kayla looked at me one last time. Her beautiful face was composed now, no longer confused or disoriented, and I saw her clearly for what she truly was, a predator who had chosen the wrong prey. "I really did care about you, Phyllis," she called out, her voice taking on that same sweet tone she had used when bringing me soup and sympathy. "You have to believe that." But I didn't believe it. Because someone who cares about you doesn't systematically destroy your mind for profit. Someone who cares about you doesn't turn your own son into an unwitting accomplice in your destruction. Someone who cares about you doesn't plot your murder while holding your hand and calling you family. The medical tests at the hospital in Long Beach were extensive and terrifying. The substance Kayla had been administering was a sophisticated cocktail of drugs designed to induce cognitive impairment, confusion, and memory loss without showing up on standard blood tests. It was the kind of thing that required pharmaceutical knowledge and careful dosage. Too little, and the effects would be minimal. Too much, and the victim could die before the plan was complete. "You are extremely lucky you caught this when you did," Dr. Teresa Weber, the toxicologist, explained as she reviewed my test results. "This particular combination of substances can cause permanent brain damage with long-term exposure. A few more months of systematic poisoning, and the cognitive effects might have been irreversible." The drugs were cumulative, building up in my system over time, which explained why my symptoms had been getting progressively worse. Each dose had added to the last, creating an increasingly severe impairment that would have eventually left me completely dependent on a caregiver, namely Kayla. Jessie stayed with me through the entire medical ordeal, holding my hand during treatments, bringing me books and magazines to pass the time, and most importantly, listening as I talked through everything that had happened. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last week, his face etched with guilt and exhaustion. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said one afternoon as we sat in my hospital room, looking out at the city skyline. "The way she always wanted to know about your finances, the way she insisted on coming to your doctor's appointments, how she seemed to know more about your medical history than I did." "You couldn't have known," I told him, though a part of me was still processing my own feelings about his role in it all. "She was good at what she did. A professional. But I should have seen it. I should have protected you." His voice broke with emotion. "She even suggested we have you evaluated for dementia last month. Said it would be better to catch it early to get you the help you needed. I thought she was being caring and responsible." The police investigation uncovered the full extent of Kayla's crimes and the intricate planning that had gone into targeting our family. She had researched us for months before engineering the chance meeting with Jessie. She knew about my wealth, my isolation after Richard's death, and my desperate desire to be closer to my son. She had studied my routines, learned my vulnerabilities, and created a persona specifically designed to appeal to what I needed most, a caring daughter figure who would bridge the gap between Jessie and me. "The plan was to have you declared incompetent and committed to a facility," Detective Bergman explained during one of her follow-up visits. "She would have moved into your house as Jessie's wife, gradually isolated him from friends and colleagues, and then something would have happened to him too, a car accident perhaps or a sudden illness. Something that would have left her as the sole heir to both estates. A year-long plan to systematically destroy my family and steal everything we had worked for. But she had underestimated one crucial factor, a caring waitress with good instincts and the courage to get involved. Kayla Richter was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse, and a dozen other charges. Her uncle, Edward, was moved to a reputable facility and was slowly recovering with the proper medication and care. The investigation into her previous husband's death was reopened, and authorities were confident they would find enough evidence for more charges. Jessie moved back home during my recovery and simply never left. He set up a home office in Richard's old study, cut back his work hours drastically, and we started having dinner together every night, just like we did when he was young. "I almost lost you," he told me one evening as we sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I'm not taking that risk again. The business will survive without me micromanaging every detail, but I can't survive losing you." Our relationship had never been closer. The trauma had stripped away years of polite distance and forced us to confront how much we actually meant to each other. We talked about Richard, about missed opportunities, about the future we wanted to build together. I was back to my old self within a few months. Sharp, independent, and maybe a little more cautious about who I trusted. But I wasn't bitter or paranoid. Life is too precious to waste on negative emotions. And I had learned that I was stronger and more resilient than I had ever imagined. Every morning, I wake up in my beautiful house and feel genuinely grateful, not just for the luxury and comfort, but for the clarity of mind to appreciate it, for the presence and love of my son, for the second chance I almost lost to a predator's greed. The woman who tried to steal my life had, instead, given me something precious. The knowledge that I could survive anything and that sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up destroying themselves. Kayla had wanted to live in my house forever, surrounded by all the beautiful things Richard and I had collected over the years. Now she has a permanent address too, just not the one she planned. Her new home has bars on the windows and locks on the doors, and she'll be there for the next 25 years, thinking about how one simple, switched glass changed everything. What do you think of this story? Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed too good to be true, who paid a little too much attention to your personal business? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your experiences with people who weren't quite what they seemed. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your opinion matters.